That had nothing to do with me. That had to do with everybody. We were all alcoholic. I've been doing martial art ever since I was a kid, and I beat James up.
On the album, and so when the metal community heard a Metallica song with acoustic guitars, they all lost their lunches.
The crowd was silent, not angry, confused. Some fans stared at the stage. Others just walked out. This wasn't the Metallica they knew, and that's exactly what the band wanted. For years, people thought Metallica had lost their minds, releasing chaotic, strange, and even hated albums. But what if they didn't lose their way? What if they were playing a game the rest of us couldn't see? This is the story of how Metallica fooled everyone with the albums their fans hated most. 1. Lulu, 2011.
I always write an opening song. Damn, I forgot.
I always look over at James. James, we forgot again.
Got my glittery robe.
Imagine your favorite band, the one you love for their awesome guitar riffs and powerful songs, suddenly releasing an album that sounds like noise. That's what happened to Metallica fans in 2011, when the band announced they were making a record with a man named Lou Reed. Lou Reed was a famous and respected rock star, but he was known for making very strange, artistic music that was the total opposite of Metallica's sound. He was an artist from a different world. The news that they were working together was a huge shock. Fans could not understand why Metallica would do this. The project was called Lulu, and it was based on 2 old German plays from 100 years ago. These plays told a dark and disturbing story about a girl who is used and hurt by the men around her. It was a very serious and complicated topic, not the kind of thing Metallica usually wrote songs about. When the album finally came out, it was even weirder than anyone had imagined. It was a very long album, about an hour and a half. And for most people, it was very difficult to listen to. Instead of singing, Lou Reed mostly just talked. He spoke his lyrics like he was reading a poem in a flat, emotionless voice. Behind him, Metallica was not playing the kind of catchy, heavy riffs they were famous for. Instead, they played long, messy, and often clashing sounds that didn't have a clear rhythm or melody. It sounded like they were just making noise in the background while Lou Reed told his dark story. The whole thing became a giant scandal among music fans.
You know, we don't care. We don't care what it's called. If it's Lollapalooza or...
The most famous moment on the album, and the one that people made fun of the most, was when Lou Reed repeated the line, "I am the table." He said it over and over in his strange, robotic voice. It made no sense to anyone. That one line became a huge joke on the internet. People used it to make fun of the entire album, saying it proved that the band and Lou Reed were being pretentious and silly. The reaction from fans and critics was overwhelmingly negative. Reviewers gave it the lowest possible scores. One famous review said listening to it was a terribly bad experience. Fans were even angrier. They felt betrayed. They went online and left thousands of hateful comments, with some even sending death threats to Lou Reed, blaming him for ruining their favorite band. Even inside the band's world, there were strange stories. Lou Reed reportedly acted like a bossy director in the studio, but then told the members of Metallica that they were the greatest band he had ever played with. It was all very confusing. But this is where Metallica played their biggest and strangest trick.
Go off stage for a bit and you won't hear a huge, yeah, come on, and you won't hear no boo. You just kind of hear, what's that? You know, did you like it? I don't know, did you?
What was that?
You know, yeah.
They fooled everyone by making an album that was never meant for the average Metallica fan. The secret was that Lulu wasn't really a Metallica album at all. It was a Lou Reed art project. Metallica were just the musicians he hired to create the sound for his vision. They used their fame and power to create something that was guaranteed to fail commercially. They tricked everyone who expected another heavy metal album. They knew people would hate it. By getting such an angry and confused reaction, they made the art project a success.
David Turner, like you were saying, it was kind of his whole vision that came together.
Its goal was to be challenging and difficult. The great deception was making people think they cared about sales or popularity with this record. They didn't. They were fooling everyone by doing something purely for art and for themselves. But Lulu wasn't the first time they made an album that sounded broken on purpose. Metallica's history is full of secrets and shocking choices. If you love uncovering the real story behind the music, make sure you're subscribed. There are more deceptions to come. 2. 2nd Street Anger, 2003.
But you know, out of my control. Something happened, I don't know what happened, but...
Before the strangeness of Lulu, there was an album that was born from pure anger and real-life chaos. In the early 2000s, Metallica was falling apart. The problems had been building for years, but now they exploded. First, their bass player, Jason Newsted, who had been with the band for over a decade, quit. He was angry because the band's singer, James Hetfield, would not let him work on his own music with another band.
Fan club that was like exclusive just for them.
James felt that if you were in Metallica, you were only in Metallica, and doing anything else was cheating on the family. This fight tore them apart. Soon after Jason left, the band faced an even bigger crisis. James Hetfield, who struggled with alcoholism, suddenly left to go to a rehabilitation center to get help.
But the way we're writing about it now, or the way I'm perceiving it, is the positive side maybe of death, or maybe death is not the end. Getting close to death does things to people.
The biggest metal band in the world had no bass player, and its frontman was gone. No one knew if Metallica would ever come back. When they did get back together to try and make music, the atmosphere was terrible. James and the drummer, Lars Ulrich, who had been friends since they were teenagers, were fighting constantly. To help them sort out their problems, they hired a therapist named Phil Towle to work with them in the studio every day. This was unheard of for a rock band. The whole messy process was filmed for a documentary called Some Kind of Monster.
So what?
It works for them.
Yeah.
We wouldn't do it, but it works
You
for
look
them.
pretty ugly in it.
We look ugly enough as it is.
You don't need any
Leave
help.
well enough alone.
The movie showed the world how broken the band was. It showed James and Lars screaming at each other, crying, and having painful therapy sessions. All of this chaos, anger, and pain went directly into the music they were making. The album was called Saint Anger, and it sounded just as ugly as the band felt. The biggest scandal of the album was the sound of the drums. Lars Ulrich made his snare drum have a loud, ringing ping sound, like someone hitting a metal trash can lid with a hammer. It was a harsh, annoying sound that was present in every single song, and it drove listeners crazy. To this day, it is one of the most hated sounds in rock music history. Lars defended it, saying he wanted it to sound raw and different, but most people just found it awful. Another shocking choice was that the album had no guitar solos. Kirk Hammett, one of the most famous guitar soloists in metal, was not allowed to play a single one.
Some of the heavier stuff they don't like so much.
This was like making a superhero movie where the hero never uses their main power. It was a huge disappointment for fans. The songs themselves were long, messy, and didn't have the clean structure of their classic hits. It sounded like angry noise. This is where the trick was. Metallica fooled everyone who was waiting for a big, shiny, polished comeback album. They were the biggest band in the world, and they could have made an album that sounded perfect and professional.
Kind of see where they were going, and all the vocal stuff was almost ready to go too, well, except for lyrics, but all the phrasing, so everyone knew kind of where the song was sitting.
Instead, they gave the world a recording of their breakdown. The awful sound wasn't a mistake. It was the entire point. They tricked people by being brutally honest. The album sounded as broken and angry as they felt inside. It was their therapy session turned into music. And the strangest part of the trick is that it worked. Saint Anger went to #1 on the charts all over the world. They fooled everyone by showing their ugliest side, and millions of people paid to hear it. This ugly, angry sound was a reaction to a time when many fans thought they had become too soft and polished. 3. Reload, 1997.
When the album first came out, we thought, okay, we'll do 3 months in Europe, and then we'll do...
A few years before the raw noise of Saint Anger, Metallica pulled a different kind of trick on their fans. One that was less about honest anger and more about stubbornness. In 1997, they released an album called Reload. It came out only a year after their previous album, Load, which had already caused a lot of controversy. Because it came out so quickly, a scandal started almost immediately. Fans and critics started saying that Reload was just a collection of leftover songs.
it takes you to another level. You got to kind of go to Olympic.
The popular belief was that these were the tracks that were not good enough to make it onto Load. It felt like getting a plate of seconds of a meal you didn't even like that much the first time. The band tried to explain this wasn't true. They said that during their time in the studio, they had written so many songs that they always planned to release them as 2 separate albums. But the Leftovers idea stuck, and it made the album feel less important from the very beginning. Reload continued to do things that made their old metal fans angry.
You know, you're just a soldier in the world. And if I'm honest with the world, they help me. The world helps me.
One of the biggest scandals was on the song The Memory Remains. For this track, they brought in a guest singer named Marianne Faithfull. She was a pop singer who had been famous in the 1960s. By this point in her life, her voice was very scratchy, weak, and shaky. At the end of the song, she sings a creepy, nursery rhyme-like part. It was a very artistic and strange choice, and it sounded nothing like heavy metal. To many fans, having this older woman with a weird voice on a Metallica song was just another sign that the band had lost its way and was trying too hard to be different. The album cover was another source of anger. Just like with Load, the cover art was a strange and controversial picture by the artist Andres Serrano. This one was called Piss and Blood. The band was once again using gross body fluids as art. They were clearly showing everyone that they didn't care if people were disgusted. They were going to do what they wanted. Musically, the album felt very inconsistent, which made the Leftovers theory seem even more true. There was a song called Fuel, which was a fast and exciting rock song that sounded a bit like the old Metallica. It felt like they had included it just to keep the angry fans happy. But then there were songs like The Unforgiven 2, a sequel to one of their most famous and beloved ballads. To many, making a sequel to such a classic song felt like a cheap move, like they were running out of new ideas and just copying their own past successes. But the real trick of Reload was all about being defiant. Metallica fooled everyone who was waiting and hoping for them to apologize for the changes they made on Load.
It sometimes can get difficult, you know, but I mean, you know they're out there, and I mean, we just try and really play as aggressively as we can, and it just sort of comes out somehow.
Everyone thought that album was just a phase, and that they would soon go back to playing the fast thrash metal that made them famous. By releasing Reload, a whole other album filled with 76 more minutes of the same slower, bluesy, hard rock, Metallica was sending a clear message. The message was, this is not a phase. This is who we are now. Get used to it. They tricked their fans into thinking they were out of ideas when in reality, they were cementing their new identity. And the album that started it all had an even bigger scandal, a haircut. Metallica has always played by their own rules, even if it meant alienating their fans. If you're fascinated by rock's biggest rebels, hit that subscribe button to follow the story. Fourth Load, 1996.
It really does depend on the person, and it's a personal journey. I had to hit the bottom. I was pretty stubborn. I didn't learn.
This whole strange chapter for Metallica, the one that turned many of their fans against them, all started with something very simple. They all cut their long hair. For years, Metallica, like most heavy metal bands, had long, wild hair. It was part of their image as rebels who played loud and aggressive music. But in 1996, after being away for 5 years, they came back, and the hair was gone. They had short, stylish haircuts. And it wasn't just the hair. They started wearing expensive clothes, smoking cigars, and even wearing eyeliner and makeup for magazine photos. They looked less like a metal band and more like a trendy alternative rock band. For the fans who had grown up with them, this was a shocking betrayal. They felt like their favorite band had sold out. To sell out means to abandon your original beliefs or style in order to become more popular and make more money. Fans accused Metallica of changing their look just to fit in with the popular music of the time. The music on their new album, Load, seemed to prove the fans' worst fears. The album was incredibly long, almost 80 minutes, and the music was completely different. The super fast, complicated, and angry thrash metal was gone. Instead, the songs were much slower, with a groovy, bluesy feel. It sounded more like classic rock and roll from the 1970s. James Hetfield had also changed the way he sang. He was singing in a lower, cleaner, more melodic voice, instead of his famous aggressive shout. The lyrics were also different. He was no longer writing about war, corruption, or monsters.
That's just to kind of kill some time, and because we're getting sick of going out to smoky clubs and shit all the time, and stuff all the time.
He was writing very personal songs about his feelings, his family problems, and his inner pain. The album's first single, Until It Sleeps, became a huge hit on MTV. For the old fans, seeing their underground heroes become popular MTV stars was the final nail in the coffin. The album's cover art was another big scandal. The band hired a famous and controversial artist named Andres Serrano. The cover was a picture called Blood and Semen 3, and it was made by mixing cow's blood and the artist's own semen between two pieces of glass. It was a piece of high-concept art that was meant to be shocking and make people think. But for most metal fans, who were used to album covers with skeletons, monsters, or cool drawings, it was just gross and pretentious. It made them feel like the band thought they were better and smarter than their own fans. But here is where Metallica pulled off their greatest swindle. They tricked everyone into thinking they were copying the popular bands of the 1990s. But the truth was more complicated. They weren't trying to sound like Nirvana or Pearl Jam. The big trick was that they were actually playing the kind of music that they themselves had loved as kids, long before Metallica even existed. The sounds on Load were heavily influenced by classic rock bands from the 1970s like Black Sabbath, Thin Lizzy, and Led Zeppelin. It was the music that had made them want to be musicians in the first place. Many years later, they would try to trick their fans one last time by pretending to go back to the very beginning. 5. Hardwired to Self-Destruct, 2016.
My brother had an extensive record collection, and this was in the late 60s, early 70s, and I could remember...
After all the confusing albums and angry fans, after the noise of Saint Anger and the art of Lulu, Metallica decided to play one final game with their audience. In 2016, after 8 long years without a new album, they surprised the world by releasing a new song called Hardwired. The song was a shock to the system. It was incredibly fast, short, and aggressive. It sounded exactly like the music they made in the 1980s, the songs that made them legends. The reaction was immediate and huge. Everyone got incredibly excited.
It's not what music it is, it's the...
Old fans who had given up on the band came back. It seemed like Metallica was finally listening. They were done with the slow rock and the weird art projects. The old thrash metal Metallica was back, and everyone was thrilled. But when the full album, Hardwired to Self-Destruct, was released, fans discovered the bait and switch. The album was very, very long, a double album with almost 80 minutes of music spread across 2 discs. And it was very inconsistent. The first disc was mostly great. It had Hardwired and other fast, exciting songs like Moth into Flame and Atlas Rise that delivered on the promise of a return to their roots. It was exactly what the fans wanted to hear. But the second disc was a completely different story. It was much slower and groovier. It was filled with the kind of mid-tempo rock songs that were all over Load and Reload, the very style that the first single seemed to be running away from. The energy dropped, and the songs started to feel long and repetitive. Some fans felt tricked. They had been promised an album full of fast thrash metal, but what they got was a mixed bag. They felt like the band had released the fastest song first on purpose, just to fool them into buying the album. This led to a new kind of scandal. It wasn't about haircuts or drum sounds. It was about marketing.
And, excuse me, my God. But, there's some flames that happened, and there was some miscommunication.
Had the band deliberately misled their audience? Was the album only a double album so they could charge more money for it? It felt to some like a calculated trick to get old fans excited, only to deliver an album that was more of the same from their controversial middle period.
The personality that likes heavy metal is just very, very passionate about their music. It's outsider music to the max. I think a lot of people view heavy metal as their companion, you know?
But this was perhaps Metallica's cleverest trick of all. They used the perfect bait, a great thrash song, to get everyone's attention and bring the entire fan base back together. The deception was making everyone think they were going back in time and erasing the last 20 years of their history. But the full album revealed the real truth. Hardwired wasn't a step back. It was a summary of their entire career. It showed that Metallica was now a band that could do everything. So, were these albums bad or just misunderstood? They proved that Metallica never stood still, and the biggest trick was keeping us all talking, arguing, and listening for years.